As the clock struck midnight, a group of ruthless thugs set their sights on what they thought would be an easy mark. A homeless man clutching his last few belongings, accompanied by a small dog. Unbeknownst to them, the man they targeted was none other than Keanu Reeves. He was simply waiting for his train after a grueling day on set, his casual attire and unassuming demeanor disguising his true identity. What happened next would leave everyone stunned. The bustling energy of New York City was fading as the streets emptied, but for Keanu, the night was far from over. Leaving the movie studio, he took a deep breath of the cool evening air. His outfit, a pair of torn jeans, a worn denim jacket, and an old baseball cap pulled low, was carefully chosen to blend in, offering him the anonymity he cherished. By his side was Andy, a beagle puppy with floppy ears and soulful eyes. Assigned to Keanu by an animal trainer to bond before filming intense John Wick scenes, Andy had become more than just a temporary companion. In just a few days, their connection had grown deeper than Keanu expected. As they walked, Keanu smiled at Andy's boundless enthusiasm, the puppy's tail wagging joyfully at every new sight and smell. They headed toward the 14th Street Union Square subway station, descending into the dimly lit underground. The station's harsh fluorescent lights cast shadows on the concrete walls, creating a somber atmosphere in stark contrast to the vibrant city above. The faint rumble of distant trains echoed through the air as the late-night crowd thinned. Navigating the station, Keanu passed through an alcove known for its homeless community, a stretch lined with makeshift shelters and tents, a stark reminder of the city's deep inequalities. While hurried commuters averted their eyes, muttering dismissive remarks, Keanu made his usual rounds. With Andy waiting patiently by his side, he moved from person to person, quietly distributing coins and small bills. This nightly ritual, a habit he'd formed during filming in the area, was his way of offering a moment of dignity to those society ignored. "Here you go," Keanu said softly to an elderly woman huddled beneath a threadbare blanket. She looked up, her weathered face breaking into a smile. "God bless you, young man," she whispered, her voice trembling with gratitude. Keanu nodded humbly, moving on without seeking recognition. For Keanu, it wasn't about fame or accolades. Most didn't even realize who he was. It was simply about doing what felt right, acknowledging the humanity in everyone he encountered. Andy, with his innocent energy, brought moments of joy to the somber faces around them. As Keanu continued through the station, reflecting on the contrast between his privileged life and the struggles of those he met, neither he nor Andy could have anticipated the unexpected confrontation that lay ahead. The underground community was a harsh reminder of the city's stark inequalities, a disparity that weighed heavily on Keanu's mind. He knew his small gestures of kindness couldn't solve the systemic issues at play, but he hoped they could brighten someone's day, even if only for a moment. As he and Andy approached a familiar tent at the edge of the alcove, an unsettling feeling crept over him. This spot was usually occupied by Max, a cheerful man whose constant companion was a tiny chihuahua named Button. Tonight, however, an eerie silence hung in the air. "Max!" Keanu called softly, his voice tinged with concern. The tent flap rustled, and Max emerged. Keanu's heart sank at the sight. Max's face bore fresh bruises, his temple swollen and discolored. His eyes, usually warm, held a haunting sadness. "Oh, hey, Keanu." Max greeted him in a near whisper, attempting a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He lowered himself onto a crate outside his tent, shoulders slumped. Keanu crouched to meet his gaze, worry etched across his face. "Max, what happened? Are you all right?" He glanced around, suddenly aware of the silence. "Where's Button?" At the mention of her name, Max's composure shattered. His shoulders trembled as he buried his face in his hands. When he finally looked up, tears streaked his cheeks. "They took her," Max choked out. "Those bastards took my Button." Keanu's brows knitted in confusion and anger. "Who? What happened?" Max's hands shook as he pulled an empty dog collar from his pocket. He stared at it for a moment, as if the sight reopened the wound. It was yesterday, Max began, his voice heavy with pain. These thugs, they've been coming around for a while now. They claim this is their territory and demand security fees. I couldn't pay. I never can. Usually, they rough me up and move on. Keanu listened intently, his hand resting on Max's shoulder while Andy sat, quietly, sensing the gravity of the moment. But yesterday, Max continued, his voice faltering. Button, she tried to protect me. She's always been so brave, my little girl. When they started shoving me, she barked at them, tried to scare them off. Then, his voice broke, and he swallowed hard. She bit one of them on the ankle. Keanu closed his eyes, already dreading the rest of the story. They went crazy, Max said, his words tumbling out in a rush. One of them kicked her hard. She yelped, and I tried to grab her, but then his hand touched the bruise on his temple. One of them had a baseball bat. I don't remember much after that. When I woke up, I was back in my tent. The others here found me and brought me back. Max stared down at the empty collar in his trembling hands. But Button, she was gone. I'm so sorry, Max, Keanu said, his voice thick with empathy. Do you think there's a chance she's still alive? Max shook his head, his gaze hollow. I don't think so, Keanu. News travels fast down here. If anyone had seen or heard about her, I'd know. It's been silent. Those guys, they're not the type to show mercy. Keanu's mind raced, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. Have you gone to the police? He asked, though he suspected the answer. Max let out a bitter laugh. The police? They're just another gang, asking for bribes to even pretend to care. They don't give a damn about us, Keanu. To them, we're just a nuisance. The weight of Max's words hung in the air. Keanu clenched his fists, feeling a surge of frustration at the injustice and sorrow for Max's loss. He glanced down at Andy, the beagle looking up at him with wide, trusting eyes, and felt a renewed sense of purpose. I'm truly sorry, Max, Keanu said, his voice resolute. But in his heart, he was already planning his next move. Keanu stood his ground as the tallest thug. Will sneered, clutching the necklace he'd just torn from Keanu's neck. Oh, I think it has plenty of value now, Will mocked, dangling the family heirloom like a trophy. The other two thugs laughed, their voices echoing in the empty station. Andy, sensing the tension, let out a low growl, his small frame tense beside Keanu. The sight of the puppy's protective stance only seemed to amuse the thugs. What's this? The bald thug jeered, pointing at Andy. Your guard dog? Cute. Keanu's composure, so steadfast in the face of escalating danger, wavered for a fraction of a second. His gaze flicked between the men, the baseball bats they swung menacingly, and Andy, who was still growling, oblivious to the danger. Look, Keanu began, his voice measured but firm. You've already taken my wallet and the necklace. There's nothing else for you here. Let us go, and we'll pretend this never happened. The shorter, stockier thug, Connie, stepped forward, his bat scraping the ground ominously. Oh, we're not done yet, he said with a sneer. You think you could just walk through our station and leave? Nah, you're gonna pay more. Keanu's jaw tightened. The platform, once a mundane stop on his nightly routine, now felt like a battleground. His mind raced as he calculated his options. Fight, flee, or try once more to reason with men who seemed beyond reason. We'll step closer, the necklace still swinging from his fingers. Here's the deal, he said, leaning in so close Keanu could smell the alcohol on his breath. You leave the dog, and we'll let you walk. Keanu's stomach turned. He glanced down at Andy, who was still growling, his floppy ears pinned back. The thought of leaving the puppy behind, defenseless against these thugs, was unthinkable. Not happening, Keanu said, his voice cold and resolute. For the first time, a hint of steel edged his tone. The thugs exchanged glances, their smirks faltering. Will's grip on the necklace tightened, and the bald thug raised his bat, pointing it at Keanu. Big mistake, pal, he growled. Keanu sighed, a calm settling over him as he shifted his stance subtly, bracing himself. Years of stunt training and choreographed fight scenes flashed through his mind. This wasn't a movie set, but the skills he'd honed might just save him and Andy. The bald thug lunged first, his bat swinging in a wide arc. Keanu ducked, his movements fluid and precise, and the bat whooshed harmlessly over his head. In the same motion, he stepped forward, delivering a sharp elbow to the man's ribs. The thug stumbled back, wheezing in pain. The other two thugs hesitated, momentarily thrown off by Keanu's quick reflexes. "What the?" Connie stammered, but Will recovered quickly, rushing at Keanu with a wild swing of his bat. Keanu sidestepped, grabbing the bat mid-swing and twisting it out of Will's grip with surprising strength. He flipped it in his hands, the weight familiar now, and leveled it at the remaining two thugs. "You really want to do this?" Keanu asked, his voice low and steady. Andy barked sharply, his little voice cutting through the tension like a battle cry. The sound seemed to rattle the thugs further. Connie took a step back, his confidence waning. "This guy's nuts," he muttered, glancing at Will, who was clutching his wrist and glaring at Keanu. "Maybe we should." "No!" Will snapped, his pride clearly wounded. "We're not backing down." But the hesitation was enough. Keanu took a single, deliberate step forward, gripping the bat tightly. His calm demeanor only made him more intimidating. "Last chance," he said. "Walk away." Finally, the bald thug groaned, clutching his side as he staggered to his feet. "Screw this, man," he muttered, retreating. Connie followed quickly, muttering curses under his breath. Will lingered for a moment, his eyes darting between Keanu, the bat, and Andy. With a snarl, he tossed the necklace onto the ground. "Fine, you're not worth it," he spat before turning and storming off. Keanu exhaled deeply, the tension leaving his body. He picked up the necklace, brushing off the grime, and slipped it back into his pocket. Kneeling, he reached out to Andy, who was wagging his tail triumphantly, oblivious to the danger they'd just faced. "Good job, buddy," Keanu said softly, scratching behind the pup's ears. He glanced down the empty platform, the echoes of the confrontation fading into the distance. As he waited for the train, Keanu couldn't help but reflect on the night's events. The vulnerability of the underground community, Max's grief, and now this. It all served as a stark reminder of the cruelty that lurked in the city's shadows. But in the midst of it all, he felt a renewed determination to make a difference, no matter how small. The train arrived with a soft roar, and Keanu stepped aboard with Andy trotting beside him. As the doors closed, he glanced out at the platform one last time, a silent promise in his heart. To return, to help, and to stand up for those who couldn't fight back. Keanu's breath came in short bursts as he sprinted through the dimly lit station, his mind racing alongside his pounding heart. The sight of the thugs disappearing into the labyrinthine tunnels with Andy was burned into his memory. He couldn't let them get away. Not with Andy, not after what they had done. Max's words about Button's tragic fate echoed in his thoughts, fueling his determination. Andy's muffled whimpers had struck a nerve, igniting a deep sense of responsibility and a growing anger at the cruelty he had witnessed. Keanu clenched his fists, his focus razor-sharp as he pushed forward. Ahead, the thugs had split up, each taking a different route. It was a deliberate move, meant to throw off anyone who dared to follow them. Keanu's eyes darted between the branching paths, his instincts taking over. He spotted Will, still holding the leash with Andy struggling in his grasp, heading toward a maintenance tunnel. "That's my target," Keanu muttered under his breath, sprinting after him. The tunnel was poorly lit, the air thick with the smell of damp concrete and rust. Keanu's footsteps echoed loudly, but Will, drunk and overconfident, didn't seem to notice he was being followed. As Keanu closed the distance, he could hear Andy's faint whimpers, spurring him onward. "Will!" Keanu's voice rang out, strong and commanding, bouncing off the tunnel walls. Will stopped abruptly, turning to face him with a sneer. "You just don't know when to quit, do you?" he growled, tightening his grip on Andy's leash. The beagle squirmed, his eyes wide with fear. "I'm giving you one chance," Keanu said, his voice low and steady. "Let the dog go, and you can walk away." Will laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You're in no position to make demands, hobo guy." He tossed the leash to the ground, drawing a switchblade from his pocket. The blade gleamed menacingly under the dim light. "You want the mutt? Come and get him." Keanu's stance shifted subtly, years of stunt training kicking in. He didn't have a weapon, but he didn't need one. Every move he'd ever learned for the screen was based on precision, and tonight it was about survival. Will lunged, the knife slashing through the air. Keanu sidestepped with practiced ease, grabbing Will's arm and twisting it sharply. The knife clattered to the ground, and Will let out a howl of pain. With a quick, calculated move, Keanu kicked the knife out of reach and shoved Will against the wall. "Call your friends," Keanu said coldly. "Tell them it's over." Will glared at him, but the fight was draining from his eyes. "You think you can take all three of us?" he spat, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and defiance. "I don't need to," Keanu replied, his grip tightening. "You'll call them off, or you'll regret it." At that moment, Andy let out a small, hopeful bark, his leash still tangled on the ground. Keanu glanced down, his resolve hardening. "This ends now," he said, his voice steely. Will hesitated, the weight of the confrontation pressing down on him. Finally, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a cheap burner phone. "Fine," he muttered, dialing a number with shaky hands. "Connie Bowie, back off. The guy's crazy. Meet me at the north exit." Keanu released his grip, watching as Will stumbled back, clutching his arm. "Pick up the dog," Keanu ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. Will complied, setting Andy down gently before stepping away. The puppy darted back to Keanu, his tail wagging hesitantly. Keanu knelt, scooping Andy into his arms and murmuring softly, "It's okay, buddy. You're safe. Now." As he straightened, Keanu's eyes bore into Will. "If I ever see you around here again, hurting anyone, I won't stop next time. Do you understand?" Will nodded hastily, his bravado completely stripped away. He backed away into the shadows, leaving Keanu and Andy alone in the tunnel. As Keanu made his way back toward the main station, Andy nestled in his arms. He felt a mix of relief and lingering anger. He had recovered the dog and reclaimed a measure of justice, but the night's events had left a mark. The vulnerability of those like Max, the cruelty of the thugs, it all weighed heavily on him. Stepping onto the platform, Keanu noticed a few onlookers whispering, but he paid them no mind. He sat down, holding Andy close, and stared into the distance. The fight wasn't over, not just for Andy, but for everyone left behind in the shadows. And Keanu Reeves wasn't one to walk away from a fight. The train approached, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Keanu stood, his resolve renewed. Andy barked softly, as if sensing the journey ahead. Together, they boarded the train, ready to face whatever came next. The thugs had vanished, swallowed by the labyrinth of the subway system. Keanu stood frozen, his breath shallow as frustration and desperation coursed through him. Andy was out there, alone and frightened, and the seconds ticking by felt like hours. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay focused. He couldn't let this be the end. Spotting two police officers nearby, Keanu's heart lifted slightly. Hope sparked in his chest as he hurried toward them. "Excuse me, officers," he began, his voice urgent. "I need to report a robbery and a kidnapping." The officers turned to face him, their eyes scanning his disheveled appearance. His coffee-stained clothes, mussed hair, and evident exhaustion seemed to paint a picture that didn't work in his favor. Their expressions shifted, not to concern, but to thinly veiled disdain. "Look, buddy," one officer said dismissively, "we don't have time for this. Move along." Keanu blinked, stunned by their response. "You don't understand," he insisted. "3 men stole my necklace and took a dog. They're dangerous, and listen," the second officer interrupted, his voice cold and dismissive. "We don't help people like you. Go sleep it off somewhere else." The blatant prejudice in their tone left Keanu momentarily speechless. His frustration boiled over, but before he could respond, a voice called out from behind him. "Oh my God, is that Keanu Reeves?" Keanu turned to see a young woman approaching, her phone already out and recording. Her astonishment and excitement were written all over her face. The shift in the officer's demeanor was instantaneous. Their expressions morphed from disdain to shock, and then to an awkward attempt at friendliness. "Mr. Reeves," the first officer stammered, his voice now dripping with feigned concern. We had no idea. How can we assist you? Keanu didn't miss the irony, nor did the young woman, who continued to film the exchange. The officers, clearly embarrassed, ushered her away, their earlier prejudice now on full display. Keanu felt a complex swirl of emotions: anger at their initial dismissal, frustration at the wasted time, and a grim satisfaction at their discomfort. But overriding all of it was a gnawing urgency. Andy was still out there, and every passing second made his rescue more difficult. Which direction did they go? One officer asked, eager to redeem themselves. Keanu hesitated, glancing down the empty corridors. It was too late. The thugs were long gone. He looked back at the officers there, earlier disregard fresh in his mind. His jaw tightened, and he made a decision. Shaking his head, he declined their belated offer of help. "You know," he began, his voice calm but cutting, "when I first approached you, I was just another person in need. Your job is to protect and serve everyone, not just the people you think deserve your attention." The officers shifted uncomfortably, shame flickering across their faces. What if I'd been seriously injured? What if every second counted? Keanu continued, his tone steady but firm. "You have no idea how urgent a situation is just by looking at someone." The weight of his words hung in the air. The officers, thoroughly chastened, stammered apologies and promised to alert their colleagues to be on the lookout for the thugs and the dog. Keanu reluctantly provided descriptions of the men and Andy, though his disappointment was evident. As he walked away, leaving the embarrassed officers behind, Keanu's thoughts churned. He was angry at the injustice, haunted by Andy's absence, and profoundly disturbed by the barriers faced by those less fortunate. The night had peeled back a layer of the city he hadn't fully understood before, revealing the harsh realities of bias and indifference. Yet amid the turmoil, a resolve began to form. Keanu wasn't the type to turn away from those in need, nor would he let the cruelty of the thugs or the apathy of others stop him. He would find Andy, no matter what it took. With renewed determination, Keanu continued his search, weaving through the station and scanning every shadowy corner. The memory of Andy's whimpers and Max's grief over Button fueled his steps. This wasn't just about a dog or a stolen necklace anymore. It was about standing up to the darkness that preyed on the vulnerable. Somewhere in the city, Andy was waiting, and Keanu wasn't about to let him down. Keanu's voice rang out with unwavering authority, echoing through the dimly lit alcove. The three thugs froze momentarily, their smug expressions faltering as they registered the intensity in his tone. Max stood at his side, his wiry frame emanating quiet determination. Together, they made an unlikely yet formidable pair, united by purpose. Will, recovering from his initial surprise, sneered and crossed his arms. "Your necklace? And dogs? You're out of your league, pal," he scoffed, stepping forward with an air of dominance. "You've got guts showing up here again, but guts won't get you far." Keanu took a deliberate step closer, unflinching. "I don't care how far it gets me," he replied, his voice sharp and calm. "I care about getting what's mine, and what's not yours to take." Bowie, the bald thug, chuckled darkly and nudged Connie, the stocky one. "This guy thinks he's a hero. Maybe he needs a reminder of who's in charge." Keanu's fists clenched, but before he could respond, Max spoke up, his voice firm despite the slight tremor of nerves. "We know all about you," he said, pointing a finger at the group. "Your racket, your hideouts, the way you prey on people who can't fight back. That ends tonight." The thugs exchanged glances, their confidence slipping as the weight of the words sank in. Will's bravado flickered, but he quickly covered it with a grin. "Big talk from a nobody," he spat. "But you don't scare us." Keanu took another step forward, now close enough to see the faint glint of his necklace tucked into Will's pocket. His eyes burned with resolve. "You should be scared," he said evenly, "because I'm not leaving without what's mine." The tension thickened, the air charged with unspoken threats. Andy's absence gnawed at Keanu's mind, his concern for the little dog fueling his anger. Every second felt like an eternity, the stakes growing higher with each passing moment.